What if what we call romantic love was nothing more than a well-constructed illusion, a myth invented to sweeten the pain of existence? What if this promise of completeness, of soulmates, and eternal happiness beside someone was just a trap that keeps us prisoners to impossible expectations? Nietzsche didn't believe in easy consolations. For him, love wasn't a fairy tale, but a vital force marked by desire, power, and even destruction. The philosopher was suspicious of what society called true love, because he saw there more will to possess and dominate than tenderness or altruism. We live surrounded by narratives that glorify the idea of twin souls, happy endings, unbreakable promises. But when reality doesn't match the myth, we suffer, feel betrayed, guilty, insufficient. Nietzsche invites us to tear this veil and see love as it is, imperfect, transitory, made of light and shadow. And you? Are you ready to question everything you believed about love? Are you willing to abandon the comfortable illusion to face the naked truth? If this type of reflection resonates with you, subscribe to the channel and follow us on this journey of deconstruction. Human beings are, above all, creatures who fear change. We carry within us a deep impulse to want what gives us pleasure to last forever. We desire to freeze moments, eternalize sensations, transform instants into monuments. In the field of love, this yearning for permanence translates into promises: forever, till death do us part, eternally yours. These are words that seem to bring security, as if love could be a contract against time. But Nietzsche, always suspicious of human illusions, would see in this promise a form of convenient lie, a refusal to accept life as it is, change, flux, becoming. Think about the beginning of a relationship. Everything is novelty, intensity, and discovery. Every glance is an invitation, every gesture is electricity. Lovers believe they have found something absolute, a flame that will never extinguish. We carve initials on trees, seal vows in gold rings, build dreams around eternity, and for an instant we believe. But time, with its silent force, begins to erode what seemed unbreakable. What was once vibrant passion becomes routine. What was flame becomes ember, sometimes almost ash. Then questions arise. Why isn't it like before? What happened to our love? Nietzsche wouldn't blame love itself, but the illusion we place upon it. The error lies in trying to freeze what is liquid, fix what is movement. Life is made of transformations, and love doesn't escape this law. To love is, by nature, something mutable. It can grow, it can diminish, it can transform into friendship, resentment, or even indifference. The problem is that the promise of eternity makes us believe that any change is failure, when actually it's just life following its course. How many marriages don't fall apart under the weight of this lie? How many people remain together not because they still love, but because they're afraid to admit the promise was fragile? They remain trapped by guilt, by social conventions, by fear of facing solitude. Others, even more tragic, remain in toxic, abusive, unhealthy relationships because they believe breaking would be breaking a sacred oath. Pain, in these cases, comes not only from love's end, but from the shock between reality and the fantasy that it should last forever. Nietzsche, with his brutally honest vision, provokes us to look at love without these romantic ornaments. For him, the promise of eternity is violence against life's very nature. We don't need love to last forever for it to be true. Its beauty lies precisely in its fragility, in its transitoriness. It's like a flower that blooms intensely and then withers. It's like music that fills the air for some minutes and then dissolves into silence. We try to prolong, but it's finitude that gives meaning. But why do we insist so much on demanding eternity? Because we are creatures of fear. We fear loss, fear solitude, fear impermanence. We create narratives to protect ourselves from anguish. Romantic love is one of these narratives. It promises us shelter against life's chaos, sells us the illusion of stability in a world that never stops moving. But every myth demands its price. And the price of eternal love's myth is inevitable suffering when reality imposes itself. Nietzsche invites us to reverse this logic. Instead of imprisoning love in promises, we should learn to be grateful for the lived instant. Love doesn't need to be eternal to be profound. It just needs to be true while it lasts. What matters isn't duration, but intensity, authenticity, the courage to live without guarantees. It's possible to love fully without needing to transform the other into a prison, without demanding that the future be a faithful copy of the past. This perspective shift is liberating, but also frightening. It demands that we abandon promises' security and face the vulnerability of the present. It demands that we accept nothing belongs to us forever, not even love. But perhaps that's where true freedom resides, when we dare to say, I don't need it to be eternal, it's enough that it's real while it lasts. And the question Nietzsche leaves us echoing is direct, almost cruel. Do we prefer to live in the promise's comfortable illusion, or are we willing to face love as it really is, imperfect, transitory, full of light and shadow? As we saw that eternity's promise is an imprisoning illusion, here we enter one of Nietzsche's most provocative ideas: love as expression of the will to power. For the philosopher behind gestures of affection, promises of care, and speeches of absolute surrender, hides a game of forces. Love, far from being pure altruism, is frequently desire for possession, need for domination, will to mold the other according to our expectations. When we say, I love you, aren't we often saying, I want you for myself? Think of everyday situations. A person feels jealous when their partner talks with someone unknown. Another imposes rules, disguised as concern, to limit the beloved's freedom. There are still those who suffocate the other with emotional demands, charging unconditional attention and dedication. In all these cases, what manifests isn't just care, but will to control. Nietzsche clearly perceived that human love is rarely disinterested. Even in the most idealized forms, there's always a silent dispute. Who gives more? Who sacrifices more? Who dominates, even if subtly? To love in this sense isn't to disappear in the other, but to measure forces with them. Love is battlefield, not garden of innocence. This doesn't mean Nietzsche despised love. On the contrary, he saw in it one of life's most intense expressions, but he refused any attempt to hide it under romantic veils. For him, recognizing love as will to power doesn't disqualify it. It merely reveals it in its real nature. When we love, we don't seek just companionship. We seek affirmation. We want the other to be living proof of our worth. We want their attention to legitimize us, their surrender to confirm our importance. Think of the typical discourse of someone who says, I can't live without you. Behind this melodramatic phrase exists a veiled confession. I need you to sustain my identity, to fill my emptiness. The other, in this case, isn't loved as they are, but as function. They become mirror, support, guarantee that we exist. And if they dare escape this role, the mask falls and love transforms into resentment. Nietzsche saw in this a trap. Love that disguises itself as purity, but that actually is appropriation. To love someone isn't just to desire their happiness. It's almost always to desire that this happiness depends on us. It's wanting to be irreplaceable, unique, center of the other's world. Even care can become a form of domination, because when caring, we also control, we also demand. But what if we accept this reality instead of denying it? What if we recognize that love is, yes, crossed by forces of power? Maybe we can build more lucid, less hypocritical relationships. To love, then, wouldn't be to pretend absolute altruism, but to assume we seek something from the other, and at the same time, allow them to also seek something from us. Love would become an encounter of strong wills, not a disguise of angelic purity. Nietzsche challenges us to look at moments when we try to tame the other in love's name. Think how many times someone changes their way of dressing, their hobbies, or even their friends to please their partner. Think how many times "I love you" carries hidden, "but you need to be like this for me." In this sense, romantic love can be just another prison, another way to domesticate life. The Nietzschean vision is uncomfortable, but liberating. Because if we recognize that love involves power, we stop falling into the naivety of impossible promises. We begin to love not as slaves to a romantic ideal, but as conscious creators. We can then transform the relationship into a space of growth instead of submission. And here arises the inevitable question: can we love without trying to possess? Is it possible to look at the other not as mirror of our lacks, but as free force that chooses to be with us without invisible chains? Perhaps this is Nietzsche's provocation, not to deny power in love, but to learn to dance with it. To recognize that loving is also disputing, but that this dispute can be creative, affirmative, not a prison. Love as will to power, far from destroying, can be what makes it more intense and true. If until now we've seen love as impossible promise and as power game, now we enter one of Nietzsche's fiercest targets, romanticism. For him, romanticism was sweet poison that numbed the soul, a way of beautifying life with sugary illusions, distancing man from his vital force. Romanticism promised transcendence, but delivered fragility. It promised intensity, but cultivated decadence. Just look how we grow surrounded by romantic stories. From early on, we hear fairy tales that speak of charming princes, predestined loves, and guaranteed happy endings. Cinema reinforces this same structure. Two souls that meet against all odds, suffer, fight, but end up together in a perfect outcome. Music, in turn, repeats refrains of eternity, devotion, and absolute dependence. Thus we form our vision of love much more through fantasy than reality. Nietzsche, however, saw in this tradition a symptom of weakness. For him, romanticism didn't strengthen, but sickened. Instead of preparing us for life's inevitable pains, romanticism infantilizes us, creating impossible expectations. We expect overwhelming passions, predestined encounters, flawless complicity. When real life doesn't correspond to this script, we feel frustration, as if we had been deceived. But it wasn't life that deceived us. We were the ones who believed in romanticism's sweet poison. A simple example: how many people have entered relationships expecting to live movie scenes, expecting the other to guess their desires, complete their sentences, fill all voids? And when this doesn't happen, disappointment arises. It wasn't true love. We create an ideal so elevated that no human being can reach it. The other stops being a person and becomes a character, obliged to interpret the role our imagination attributed to them. The result is inevitable: resentment, guilt, accusations of coldness. Nietzsche would call this disguised nihilism. Because instead of facing life as it is, hard, imperfect, unstable, we choose to flee to imaginary worlds. Romanticism would be, therefore, a form of denying existence, of refusing reality in favor of comfortable illusions. And every refusal of life for Nietzsche is decadence. Romantic love, in this sense, isn't life's celebration, but its negation. But why does this poison attract us so much? Because it's sweet. Romanticism offers a narrative of meaning, of purpose. It promises there's someone made for us, that everything will fit, that suffering will have a happy ending. It's easier to believe this than to accept that love is uncertain, that there are no guarantees, that pain is part of it. Romanticism's poison is like sugar. It comforts but weakens. Nietzsche invites us to perceive how this ideal imprisons us. By seeking perfect love, we stop seeing real love. By waiting for the soulmate, we stop valuing concrete encounters. By desiring eternity, we despise the instant. We live in the dream of what could be and forget to live what is. Thus, romanticism steals from us the power of the present. But there's an exit. Transform this poison into lucidity. Recognize that romanticism was just a cultural invention, not a universal law. Free ourselves from the expectation of ready-made happy endings and open ourselves to imperfection's beauty. Love without script, without fantasy, without demanding the other be a character in our internal novel. Love as encounter between living forces, not as fulfillment of a romantic prophecy. Nietzsche, with his acid irony, would perhaps ask, how many people have you let escape because they didn't correspond to your romantic ideal? How many possible loves were sacrificed on perfection's altar? How many times have you rejected reality in the name of fantasy? These questions bother because they reveal our complicity with the poison. We weren't poisoned by force, we chose to drink from this cup. The challenge is this: dare to abandon the sweet and face the bitter. Love without demanding perfection. Recognize that life isn't romance, but tragedy and comedy mixed, and still say yes to life with all its hardness. This is the Nietzschean antidote against romanticism's poison, the courage to love without illusions. Until now, we've seen love as illusory promise, as power game, and as romantic poison that weakens the soul. But Nietzsche wasn't just a destroyer of illusions. He also saw in pain and suffering a possibility of creation. Love for him shouldn't be just pleasure and sweetness. To love is also to face the risk of loss, the wound of abandonment, the silence of disillusions. However, it's precisely in this painful terrain that a transforming force can be born. Think of someone who had their heart broken. Initially, the pain is almost unbearable. The body suffers, sleep disappears, thought revolves around absence. It seems impossible to move forward, but with time, this same pain can become a motor of change. How many people haven't reinvented themselves after a relationship's end? They changed cities, discovered new passions, dove into forgotten projects. The suffering, which seemed destructive, became seed of a new life. Nietzsche believed pain shouldn't be eliminated, but transformed. He distrusted philosophies and religions that promised anesthesia of the soul, a life without suffering. For him, a life without pain would also be a life without depth. Love in this sense is a school of tragedies that, if well lived, can make us stronger. The pain of loss reveals our vulnerability, but also our capacity to create from emptiness. It's no coincidence that so many artworks were born from failed loves. Poets who wrote their most beautiful verses before absence, musicians who composed eternal melodies inspired by broken hearts, painters who put in colors their longing and despair. Loving suffering, instead of just paralyzing, can give voice to what was previously mute. Nietzsche, looking at these examples, saw in pain a creative potency, an affirmation of life even in its cruelest face. But there's a danger: transforming suffering into victimization. Many people, when suffering in love, sink into resentment. They hold grudges against the other, blame destiny, become prisoners of bitter memories. For Nietzsche, this would be wasting pain. Resentment doesn't create, it only consumes. The true challenge is different. Use pain as raw material for something new. Suffering needs to be metabolized, not idolized. This requires courage. It requires looking at the wound without denying it, but also without letting ourselves be defined by it. Loving will always bring risk, will always open space for the possibility of frustration. And still, it's better to love with this consciousness than to protect ourselves behind walls. Nietzsche would remind us that to live is to expose ourselves to danger, and love is one of existence's greatest dangers. But it's also one of the greatest opportunities for creation. Love and suffering walk together because both deal with what is greater than us. To love is to surrender to the unpredictable, to let go of control's reins. To suffer is to recognize we're not absolute masters of our destiny. But it's precisely at this point of humility that something extraordinary can be born. A deeper life, less superficial, more open to the real. Imagine someone who, after love's end, decides never to open up again, closes their heart, avoids risks, transforms into stone. This person can avoid new pains, but also deprives themselves of new possibilities. On the contrary, another person, after suffering, decides to rebuild themselves, open up again, but in a more lucid way, more conscious. This is the difference between succumbing to pain or transforming it into strength. Nietzsche would say only those who suffered deeply can love more truthfully, because they no longer delude themselves with easy promises nor expect perfection. They learn that love is made of tragedy and joy, of encounters and missed encounters, and still choose to live intensely. This is the love that doesn't seek anesthesia, but affirms life in all its complexity. The question that remains is, what do we do with the suffering that love brings us? Do we allow it to destroy us, make us bitter, resentful, or do we let it transform us into creators, into stronger, deeper, more alive beings? Nietzsche invites us to choose the second option, because for him, the true triumph isn't to live without pain, but to transform pain into work. We reach a crucial point. If romantic love is an illusion, if suffering is part of its fabric, if the will to power is always present, then what remains? Nietzsche didn't want us to destroy love to fall into empty cynicism. On the contrary, he wanted to free us from false ornaments so we could live a more honest, more real, more vital love. To love without romanticism doesn't mean to love less. It means to love without masks. The first step toward this love is recognizing impermanence. Instead of expecting it to last forever, we accept it can change, grow, or even disappear. This doesn't diminish its importance. On the contrary, it increases its intensity. It's precisely because we don't know how long love will last that it becomes precious. Just as sunset is beautiful because we know night will soon fall, love is beautiful because it's transitory. Fragility isn't a defect, it's part of its greatness. The second step is abandoning the idea of possession. In romanticism, we love as if the other were ours, as if they belonged to us. We demand total exclusivity, constant presence, mutual dependence. But Nietzsche invites us to think of love as encounter of free forces. The other isn't our property. They're an autonomous existence that chooses to be with us, and this choice, precisely because it's free, is infinitely more valuable than any promise. To love without romanticism is to respect the other's space, not try to mold them to our expectations, accept them as they are. Imagine two people who decide to be together without demanding eternity, without imposing rigid roles, without transforming the relationship into contract. Each recognizes the other can leave at any moment, and it's precisely this consciousness that makes lived love more intense, more true. There are no guarantees, but there's presence. There's no eternity, but there's instant. This love is like dance. Both move freely, and it's from this freedom that harmony is born. Nietzsche saw in love not a negation of life, but an affirmation of it. To affirm life, we must accept it as it is, imperfect, unstable, transitory. Romanticism, by denying this reality, creates sickened love, trapped in fantasies. To love without romanticism is to return love to its natural place, not as unreachable myth, but as concrete experience of encounter, desire, creation, and even conflict. Of course, this type of love is more challenging. It's easier to believe in fairy tales, in ready promises, in guaranteed happy endings. Difficult is to love without guarantees, open ourselves without knowing if we'll be reciprocated tomorrow, surrender ourselves knowing we can lose. But this difficulty is also proof of its authenticity. Those who love without illusions love truly because they don't rely on fantasies but face reality head-on. Nietzsche would provoke us to rethink our own relationships. How many times have we tried to transform the other into projection of our dreams? How many times have we demanded perfection as if the partner had to correspond to an idealized role? To love without romanticism is to abandon this theater. It's to look at the other and say, I see you as you are, not as I would like you to be. It's to give up the security of fantasies to embrace real life's instability. This love without romanticism isn't cold. On the contrary, it's ardent, because it's not sustained by empty promises, but by the present's intensity. It doesn't need vows of eternity. It just needs the courage to live the instant with all vigor. It doesn't need happy endings. It needs the boldness to create new beginnings each day. But this path also demands radical detachment, not confusing love with prison. If the other wants to leave, they must be free to depart. And if we want to follow another path, we must have courage to do so. To love without romanticism is to love without chains. To accept that freedom is an essential part of encounter. It's to understand that the true value of being together comes precisely from the possibility of not being and still choose to remain. In the end, to love without romanticism is to love more tragically, in the sense Nietzsche valued. A love that knows of pain, loss, impermanence, and still says yes. It's a love that doesn't deny reality, but affirms it in all its complexity. This love may not be sweet like fairy tales, but it's strong, intense, real. And the question posed is, are we willing to give up comfortable illusions to live a more true, freer, more human love? After traveling through eternity's illusions, the will to power, romanticism's poison, and the possibility of creating from suffering, we reach the culminating point, love's transformation into freedom. This is perhaps the greatest revolution Nietzsche invites us to realize. He didn't want us to abandon love, but to free it from the moral, religious, and romantic prison culture placed it in. To love truly wouldn't be to lose ourselves in the other, but to affirm ourselves alongside the other. To understand this transformation, we must remember what love became in our society. It was molded as contract, as duty, as promise of eternal stability. It was associated with Christian morality, which demands sacrifice and abnegation. It was dramatized by romanticism, which demands devotion and absolute dependence. The result is that often love converted into prison of expectations, prison of social roles, prison of illusions. Nietzsche, always suspicious of everything that imprisons, saw danger in this. When we transform love into obligation, we kill its vital force. Transforming love into freedom means breaking with this logic. It means understanding that to love isn't to imprison, but to let be. It's not to demand from the other that they adapt to our expectations, but to accept they are living force in constant change. And paradoxically, it's precisely when we stop imprisoning that love can flourish more intensely. Love as freedom doesn't need chains because it sustains itself in continuous choice. Think of a relationship where both involved know they could be elsewhere, but choose to remain together. This choice, repeated day after day, is infinitely more powerful than any vow of eternity, because it's not born from obligation, but from renewed will. To love in freedom is to wake every day and say, I choose to be here, knowing we could not be. This requires courage, but also gives love an authenticity romanticism could never offer. Nietzsche saw in free love an expression of his philosophy of life as creation. To live isn't to repeat formulas, but to invent. To love, then, should also be continuous invention. There's no ready script, no traced destiny, no guaranteed happy ending. There's only the encounter of two forces that transform together in an open process, always unfinished. Love as freedom is a work under construction, never a finished product. But how to live this love in practice? First, abandoning the need for control. Often we try to mold our partner, transform them into someone who corresponds to our ideal. This isn't love, it's tyranny. Free love begins when we accept the other is uncontrollable, carries mysteries we'll never possess. To love in freedom is to celebrate this difference, not fight it. It's to allow the other to be themselves, even when this challenges or frightens us. Second, we must reconcile with impermanence. Love can change form, can transform into friendship, can even disappear. This doesn't mean failure, it just means life followed its course. Free love doesn't need to last forever, it just needs to be true while it exists. And if one day it ends, it shouldn't leave only resentment, but gratitude for what was lived. Third, it's necessary to understand that freedom doesn't mean coldness or indifference. To love in freedom isn't to love less, but to love more intensely, because it doesn't rely on illusions, but on the instant's truth. When we don't demand eternity, the present becomes more alive. When we don't ask for guarantees, each gesture gains more value. Free love is ardent because it doesn't rely on crutches. It walks by itself without needing chains to sustain itself. Nietzsche would probably smile before the idea of a couple that loves without promises. For him, this would be the most honest way to live. Two forces that meet, that attract each other, that challenge each other, but don't imprison each other. It's a love that doesn't base itself on sweet illusions, but on the courage to say yes to life in all its hardness. It's a love that accepts risk, doesn't flee from suffering, reinvents itself each day. Deep down, transforming love into freedom is also transforming ourselves, because we can only love freely when we free ourselves from our own chains, fear of solitude, need for control, search for guarantees. Free love is born from strong individuals who don't need to use the other as crutch to sustain their existence. Only those capable of being alone are capable of loving truly, because in this case, love isn't born from lack, but from abundance. It's not necessity, it's creation. Here's Nietzsche's great provocation. Are we prepared for this type of love? Or do we still prefer the comfort of romantic illusions with their impossible promises and repeated plots? Free love is demanding because it obliges us to face life as it is. But it's also liberating because it allows us to love without fear, without resentment, without chains. Love's transformation into freedom is deep down the transformation of our own relationship with life. To love in freedom is to love life without asking it to be different, without demanding from it only pleasure or comfort. It's to say yes also to pains, uncertainties, losses. It's to affirm life in all its tragedy and still find beauty in it. And the question Nietzsche would leave us, echoing as challenge, is this: do we have courage to love not to possess, but to liberate? Not to imprison, but to create? Not to protect ourselves, but to expose ourselves? This is the love that doesn't promise easy happiness, but offers us something much greater: the chance to live authentically, intensely, and freely. Throughout this journey, we stripped the masks surrounding love. We saw how eternity's promise imprisons, how will to power crosses our relationships, how romanticism poisons the soul with sweet illusions, how suffering can become source of creation, and finally, how it's possible to transform love into freedom. Nietzsche didn't want us to destroy love, but to free it from the chains that weaken it. He showed us that to love truly isn't to lose ourselves in fantasies, but to face reality with courage. Romantic love, as we were taught, is myth, a story that promises completeness, eternity, and perfection. But real love is something else. It's movement, conflict, impermanence. It carries as much pleasure as pain, as much encounter as loss. And it's precisely because it's like this that it has strength. To love without illusions is to love with intensity, to live the present without demanding guarantees, to allow the other to be free and still choose to remain beside them. And you? What belief about love has most imprisoned you until today? The soulmate myth, the promise of eternity, the idea that to love is to sacrifice oneself. Share your reflection in the comments and also tell us where you're watching from. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel to continue this philosophical journey with us. Thank you for being part of this community that dares to question what many prefer to believe without thinking. Here we don't seek easy consolation but the courage to see truth.